Welcome. My name is Karen Clifton, and I am with the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition. Welcome to CPMC's Town Hall on Healing After Abortion. I'm going to begin. To quote Natasha Morrison, repairing what's broken is a distinctly biblical concept, which is why, as people of faith, we should be leading the way into redemption, restoration, and reconciliation. We are all broken people, and sometimes brokenness leads people to make wrong choices or cause harm which results in incarceration. This is why we need to talk about the effects of abortion. Sadly, today, abortion has become politicized and such a hot button issue. We don't want to talk about it. So we are so blessed and so fortunate to have Dr. Martha Shuping with us today to hone our pastoral skills and give us tools to accompany people who are suffering the wide range of effects from an abortion. But before we begin, I'm going to ask you just to take a second and center yourself, put all your distractions aside, and we'll let us open in prayer. Always present God, help us to be present to all who need us. Help us to be present to those we know too well who actually see, and to those who are unseen strangers to us. Give us the ability to model your attention, your attentive, loving gaze when we view our world, our families, our friends, and the person in front of us, who are seen and loved by you first. Finally, may our availability be marked by a desire to be like your Son, open to be sent, open to be loved, open to become love in the world. Amen. Again, thank you, Dr. Martha Shuping, for being with us. You are just the perfect, absolute gift for CPMC. Dr. Martha Shuping is a medical doctor who specializes in psychiatry. While in her psychiatry residence training, she had patients who had suffered from psychological and spiritual effects of abortion, and this led her to earn a master's degree in pastoral ministry. Over the years, she has helped more than 1,000 women and men individually and in faith-based abortion recovery programs. She has helped to train and equip people in more than 20 countries for ministry in both pregnancy center and abortive recovery programs. She's also a Harvard-trained researcher and author of books and articles about abortion and abortion recovery. She is currently president of Ashford Institute, through which she conducts educational programs related to trauma and recovery, particularly related to abortion. We thank you, Dr. Shuping, for being with us today. And I'm going to ask all of you that are on the call, if you would please, if you have a question, just add it into the chat, and we will, if it's part of the conversation, I'll ask the question. And then if not, we'll answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. So, Dr. Shuping, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. And now I'm just trying to see if my slides will advance. There we go. So today I'm going to be talking about abortion recovery ministry, especially in prisons and jails. And we've already talked about some of my credentials. Basically, to start with an overview, many prisoners, both men and women, need this type of ministry. And for many, the abortion was the event that started them on that path that led to incarceration. There are many large studies from several countries that show there is a statistically significant increased risk of alcohol and drug abuse after abortion. And we know that that can lead to arrests, whether it's driving while impaired or things of that nature, but also it can contribute to other crimes such as acts of violence, including intimate partner violence, including child abuse, and lots of other things while impaired by drugs and alcohol. So very often people I know who go into the prisons have said that this is something that they've observed, that that's kind of the pathway, that the abortion was a pivotal thing that started a very bad downward spiral. And it's also true that many women and men in prisons and jails desire abortion recovery ministry. They will participate and they do benefit from this ministry. And I know one particular team in Florida that was going into prisons and had talked with the deacon about this, and he thought, no, you're not going to get men to talk about this, and there aren't any men who need this. And then he decided in doing maybe a communion service or something where he had a group of men together in a chapel situation. He asked them, he handed out pieces of paper and said to either make an X or an O, put a mark to indicate whether or not they desired help with the past abortion. And he was totally amazed and almost like couldn't believe it that a very large number of men did report a desire. And so then he was convinced. He realized that the team that had been telling him there was this need actually was exactly on target, that men and women do desire this help in prison. Sometimes people think that in a prison setting, they may not disclose or may not talk about their feelings or talk about the abortion, but in discussion-based programs, they will, and they've benefited greatly. So I want to talk today a little bit, I'm going to try to talk about both one-on-one ministry that you can do with individuals, as well as two programs, Rachel's Vineyard and Save One, that have been used successfully in prisons and jails by people I know. And usually it requires some modification because there may be limits on what props and materials can be brought into the jail or prison. And this can vary from one state to another, from one facility to another. There can be different time limits, differences on who can attend. In some cases, in a jail setting, some groups have been told you have to make something that's inclusive, that everybody can attend. And so on the one hand, you want to be able to help with the abortion, but they want to broaden it so that everybody can participate. And there's all kinds of limits and restrictions, and we won't be able to address every possible, but I just want to be aware, or for you to be aware, that I know that there are different limits and we have to adapt the programs, but they are being done in prisons and jails. Not enough, but they are being done. And I think it's also important to remember that whether it's an individual you're meeting with or in a group meeting, you probably already know that each time it may be your only opportunity to meet with that person, that prisoners get transferred to another facility, they go into solitary for some reason. So we want to make that one opportunity count, so that even if you were doing a once a week type program, you want to be able to pray for each person, and to think about what can you do, brief interventions that will help in case you don't see that person again, not to waste your opportunities. And it's also important to note that Catholic women in particular, I don't have research for men, but I know that Catholic women who have abortions most often stop identifying as Catholic after the abortion, and a majority would not seek help from a priest. Now, in prison, that may be different. You're the only contact, and if they know you can help with an abortion and they're suffering from that, yes, they do participate in programs and they do seek ministry when that opportunity is available. But in a survey through the general public, interviewing people to find who had an abortion and who would they choose to go to for help and this sort of thing, women who had been Catholic no longer identify as Catholic in many cases, and women say that's basically the last person they would go to as a priest. They may be afraid of being judged because this is a very rejection-sensitive group of people and very sensitive to being judged, fearing judgment from others. And so just to keep that in mind. But if you get into this type of ministry, for many people, this is the most powerful, helpful, life-changing thing that you can do for them. If there's an abortion in their past and you help them to deal with it, it will change their life. And you will be amazed and just blessed to be part of that process of watching people become new creations. So Catholic post-abortion ministry, which now the preferred term generally is abortion recovery ministry, just because some people may not know what the word post-abortion means, even though to some it would be obvious. But people are using the term abortion recovery ministry. But the root of this is Pope John Paul II's Evangelium Vitae, paragraph 99, where he said, I would now like to say a special word to women who have had an abortion. The church is aware of the many factors which may have influenced your decision, and she does not doubt that in many cases it was a painful and even shattering decision. The wound in your heart may not yet have healed, but the Father of mercies is ready to give you his forgiveness and his peace in the sacrament of reconciliation. And it goes on, I've edited, but to the same Father and his mercy, you can with sure hope entrust your child. And I think those are two really key points, that the Father of mercies is ready to forgive, and at the same time, you can trust your child to the Father of mercies. And the sad thing is that many Catholics have never, ever heard those words. And what I would encourage you to do is to look for section 99 in the document and start with those words. I would now like to say a special word. That section from there to the end of the paragraph, that is so important. That is often read from the pulpit at post-abortion healing services, and it is given to people in their folder when they do a Rachel's Vineyard retreat. That section is printed out where they can read it themselves. And often it's also read maybe during the memorial service or some other time, that this is something that is really powerful to people. When I have spoken at parishes, or sometimes I've spoken at the cathedral parish at invitation of a bishop, and if they give me 2 minutes after communion, I have chosen to read this. And women will say afterwards, I never knew that. That is so beautiful. And whether people have had an abortion or have not had an abortion, it's very meaningful to hear that, to know that the church is there to heal women and, of course, men. And I always make that point. It's men and women, although early on it was more women who were coming forward, and that's how the Pope wrote this. But nonetheless, it's for men and women. So the two programs that have been used in jail and prison settings that I know of, that are used somewhat often, relatively often compared to not at all. Save One is both a book, and it's the name of a global ministry for abortion recovery. And it is in many, many countries on every continent. And the same for Rachel's Vineyard. Rachel's Vineyard is in about 70 different countries. So Rachel's Vineyard is a global ministry as well as a retreat manual. And with Save One, you can purchase the book. With Rachel's Vineyard, they hold it back, and the books are not provided unless you have had the training to qualify to have a Rachel's Vineyard team. So now I want to compare Save One and Rachel's Vineyard just for some general information. Both of these programs, one of the reasons I recommend them and I love them, they're both open to men and women impacted by abortion. Many programs are only for women, and a small number are only for men. This will accept both, and you can do all men's group in a men's prison. You can do all women's group at a women's prison. It is possible to do men and women together, and in the community, that's more often the case, actually. And it's very positive that way. It works out well. It's also open to both of these. Unlike some other groups, these are open to family members or others affected by the abortion, so that if the grandmother of the aborted child or someone else who was impacted, a sibling, these are both also available in English, Spanish, and numerous other languages. So if you have a particular language group you want to work with, it's in Chinese, it's in Russian, it's in Vietnamese. No, not Vietnamese, but it's in many languages, I'll say. So these are both consistent with the Evangelium Vitae in offering God's forgiveness, as well as entrusting the child to God's care. Both of these programs are currently in use in Catholic dioceses. Rachel's Vineyard is in numerous Catholic dioceses. Save One is to a lesser extent in some Catholic dioceses, but they're appropriate for Catholics. And these both will include those, even though that's usually not the majority, but they will include those with other pregnancy losses if there is a miscarriage or stillbirth. And so again, if we're trying to be inclusive, and if it's a setting where you have to be inclusive and say, no, everybody's got to come or nobody at all, you can include those who've had other pregnancy losses, or even say, well, if you've had other losses to grieve, just come. And you may focus on an abortion, but if people have other, they can pray about their other losses as well. So definitely they try to keep, in Rachel's Vineyard in particular, they really want to keep that focus on abortion, but it can be broadened. And with Save One, they routinely take people with these other losses. And I've done them with mixed groups. So to compare and contrast a little bit, the founder of Rachel's Vineyard is Teresa Burke, a Catholic psychologist with a doctorate degree. Sheila Harper wrote the Save One program. She is an Assembly of God minister with an MA in biblical counseling. So her program is not Catholic, but it is non-denominational and appropriate for all Christians. If you have a mixed group and it's Protestant and Catholic together, that works well. But the Rachel's Vineyard, Rachel's Vineyard has a manual that's in a Catholic edition that has an imprimatur indicating full church approval, but there's also a Protestant edition, which basically it just has references to Blessed Mother taken out, and there's no Mass or confession if you do it Protestant. But obviously you can still offer those things. If you have a mixed group, Catholics can be provided with Catholic sacraments. The Rachel's Vineyard is usually done in 1 3-day weekend, but it can also be done once a week over 13 weeks or so, or adapted according to what you have available. And the Save One was designed as a 10-week Bible study. And even though it's a Bible study, it's not exclusively cognitive, that they do deal with feelings. It's not just a head thing that you're studying verses, but you deal with the spiritual and emotional issues in discussion. And in a way, even though the format is different and the structure is somewhat different, in many ways, to me, it's the closest thing to Rachel's Vineyard that's not Rachel's Vineyard. It is non-liturgical, but based on the Bible and prayer focused. The Rachel's Vineyard, of course, is designed from the beginning to include Catholic sacraments and liturgy, which are omitted for Protestant groups. Rachel's Vineyard uses Ignatian type meditations in which you put yourself into scripture stories. We'll read the scriptures from the Bible directly and then go back and do a meditation where you imagine you're there, like you are the woman caught in adultery and you're being dragged through the streets. You feel the ropes cutting on your wrists and you feel the heat of the day. You see the men with those stones and you put yourself into that. And then you have discussion and other activities that help to bring the word to life in your life. With Rachel's Vineyard, people meet Jesus gradually through the Gospels, because most of the stories are from the Gospels, and gradually they're drawn into relationship with him, whether for the first time or to renew a relationship after being away for a very long time. And with Save One, it's not so much gospel only, but many scriptures that will draw people back into a relationship with God. Both of these programs will have participants writing a letter to their child to express their love for the child and their sorrow for the abortion. And they pour out their heart in a letter to their child. And then they will conclude, the Rachel's Vineyard has a memorial service to formally entrust their child to God's care. Save One calls it a night of honor rather than a memorial service, but it's similar, and it's to honor the life of their child. And both serve an important function because the woman needs to recognize herself as a mother, to know that she is a mother, to have that motherhood affirmed, and to know that she has a child in the care of the Lord. There are also exercises during the weekend in both programs to lead people to forgive those who were involved in the abortion. As we'll see, there may have been domestic violence, there may have been pressure, or even forced abortion may take place, threats of homelessness, different things. And she may have many very good reasons to be very angry at a lot of people, and yet the anger and bitterness can't stay if she wants to be healed. And we have to facilitate their being able to process the anger, and there's structured ways of doing it so that you're not floundering with, oh, what do I do? They have exercises that will help people to do that, to be able to forgive. And then Rachel's Vineyard is conducted by an entire team that includes clergy, mental health professional, and volunteers, where Save One is normally led by one leader or sometimes with a co-leader. And so it's actually there's less work involved in having to coordinate many people and many parts. Save One is simpler to do and to get started with, but they're both really superb programs. And I am amazed at the healing that I have seen with these. So for Save One, there's a video training that's available for purchase, Or you can do a half-day online live training that they offer at intervals by webinars. So every few months they may have one. After the training, you would pretty much be able to start utilizing Save One immediately. You could take it into jails and do it. For Rachel's Vineyard, a first step is to attend an actual weekend to see and experience the process. And rather than being an observer, you're encouraged to use that time to pray about some area of your life that needs healing, maybe some loss you've experienced, to pray for yourself or someone else, so that participants don't feel like you're just there to watch them like they're zoo animals, you know? And so but you want to experience the retreat as fully as you can. And then after the retreat, you would still need to form a team and have additional mentoring. And it can take time before you're able to proceed with offering Rachel's Vineyard. So there's more work involved in getting it started up, but it is an excellent program. And probably the best way to bring it into a prison would be to partner with an established team in your area. And if you were being added as an additional clergy member or other, religious or deacon or lay ministry, any of those people could be added onto an existing team, although the general requirement is that people go through a retreat first before they offer it. And one of the reasons for that is I do know that there was a team many years ago in a Midwestern state where the psychologist on the retreat had had an abortion herself that she had not disclosed. And when she got into the retreat, she was so consumed with her own emotions that she was not really able to function in the role that she was there for. And it's kinder to the individual to first try out the retreat and see how you were affected by it. Other people may find that they aren't comfortable with the level of trauma that's shared. So it's important to be able to just kind of be there where you're not on the job, to be able to let God do whatever he'd like to do through that program for you, and also for you to begin to understand. I know that I am not post-abortive myself, but the first time I went through the retreat, I was in an altered state a lot of the time. I was in tears, and I was really amazed and just really appreciating seeing God work in patients that I had referred into the retreat, which Teresa Burke did for us as a training retreat. But I was not fully able to take on board everything that was going on because I was affected emotionally by it in a good way, but I was affected. And so it gives you the grace of being able to see and experience it first. I would say that whether or not you are going to do a group program, that when you go through the Rachel's Vineyard, you will never be the same, and you will see and you will be able to minister in a way that you would not have been previously, even in your one-on-one. I don't know if I said this. I hope I'm not repeating myself. I'm remembering from practicing this, that with the woman caught in adultery, one of the women that I remember hearing at one of the earlier retreats made the statement, well, they should have stoned me to death for what I did. And I was surprised to hear that. I understand that people regret their abortion, that women are there to heal, that this has been painful for them, but to hear her say, I should be dead, I should be stoned to death for what I did. And so the women, they fear judgment from others, but they're judging themselves the most harshly. We don't have to tell them they did something wrong. If they're asking for help with it, their heart has told them, and they're suffering because of that. And so you will hear things from women that you will better understand, from women and men. You will better understand their experience from having sat through one Rachel's Vineyard weekend. And if you don't have time or opportunity to go through a retreat, and they're offered pretty much in every state in the United States, but sometimes the timing doesn't work out, one thing or another. If you go through the Rachel's Vineyard training, part of that will be video clips of women who've been through the program and looking at different chapters of the book and saying, well, when I was teaching this, or when I was in my group for the first time and I was experiencing this, this is how it was for me. And you can see the things that help them to heal. So I think it's really important training to go through, and you'll be better equipped to even do those one-on-ones if you never do a group. So I want to just touch briefly on the research. I supervised the doctoral research of Susan Harmio, and she studied Rachel's Vineyard She had 7 sites in both the US and Canada. Only about 42 women who participated in the actual research, but giving pre-tests and post-tests, before and after the retreat, there were highly significant reductions in shame and also significantly increased self-esteem, both at the highly significant level. And they also reduced 2 types of trauma symptoms that we'll hopefully touch on if I don't run out of time. Avoidance, where you just avoid anything that reminds you about the abortion because it's so painful. Hyperarousal is too much bad energy that can lead to violence, child abuse, domestic violence, a lot of different things. So anyway, hyperarousal may be what puts people in jail. So those 2 types of trauma symptoms were highly significantly reduced. And the spiritual aspects were important to people. Now, the preliminary results, she had tried to study SAVE 1, but she was only able to get data from 6 people. And so it wasn't a fair comparison, and she ended up not publishing on the SAVE 1. But the data was highly significant. And the lady who did our statistics was really impressed that with such a small sample, we could still get such good results. So I want to tell you about 2 real cases. Stacy Zally was a young woman who died by suicide at age 20. The suicide note said she wanted to be with her baby. And putting that in bold because that's often the case when women have killed themselves after abortion. They may say that. She wanted to be with her baby. She had an abortion that she did not want at the time, and she had it because of pressure from her boyfriend. I put that in bold because that is very often the case. The abortion was against her religious beliefs. And I can tell her story and her name because her story became totally public when her father sued the physician who did the abortion. In England, British artist Emma Beck committed suicide at age 30, and the suicide note shows that abortion was the reason. She said, I told everyone I did not want to do it, even at the hospital. So she didn't want the abortion, but she had it anyway. I was frightened. Now it is too late. I want to be with my babies. So again, there it is. I want to be with my babies. Clearly, not everybody who has an abortion kills themselves, but there is increased risk. And for some reason, okay. So part of the problem, there's a book by Father Mike Mannion that I hope, Monsignor Michael Mannion, that I hope we'll get to. But he talks about the reality that the source of the pain is the fact that the mother loves the child and bonds to that child. And that is the source of the pain and the grief, but it also is a source of her healing in the end. It's that relationship with the baby that heals her. Once she recognizes that the child does forgive her and that the child is being cared for in some sense by Jesus. And so anyway, scientifically, prenatal bonding has been shown to occur. There's been research on this for more than 75 years, that bonding between mother and child begins during pregnancy, not at birth. And so it's that bonding that gives rise, when the baby is gone, to all the grief and trauma. Well, I can't, okay. So the attachment often begins very early in pregnancy, soon after conception. And several studies have shown there's a biological basis for this via the hormone oxytocin. So oxytocin has a role in labor and delivery, in milk letdown for breastfeeding, and it also promotes bonding to the baby, which we call maternal fetal attachment. And oxytocin can be measured in the mother during the first trimester. It's circulating in her bloodstream. This is a book that's written for abortion providers by abortion providers to teach them how to do abortions. And on the lower right corner in blue and white is the logo of the National Abortion Federation. This textbook lists 18 risk factors that, if present, show that there would be increased risk of mental health problems after abortion. That, the pro-abortion side would say, no, nobody really has any problems after abortion. But yeah, if you had these other pre-existing conditions, well, yeah, you might have a problem, but it's the pre-existing conditions. Well, one of the pre-existing conditions, Priscilla Coleman is a pro-life researcher who identified 21 different studies that showed that women have increased risk for psychological problems after abortion if they were committed to the pregnancy, had attached to the child, believed in the humanity of the child, or were psychologically invested in the pregnancy. Now, she actually found more different things that gave risk than that, but just related to the baby that we're looking at, these are different studies, 21 studies in all, that show, yes, you have increased risk with these conditions being present. And that's the same as the, I got my slides out of order apparently, but with the abortion book, commitment and attachment to the pregnancy is listed as a risk factor for negative emotional reactions after abortion. So I thought that was shocking the first time I read that they know that some women are committed to their pregnancy, they have bonded to their child, and yet here they are in the clinic. Why are they having an abortion? The American Psychological Association is also a pro-abortion organization. They are formally pro-abortion. And they've identified 17 risk factors, included being committed to the pregnancy, or if the pregnancy is wanted and meaningful, yes, they're at increased risk for mental health problems after abortion. The problem is they underestimate, and they have no idea how many women want their baby, do not want the abortion, and have the abortions anyway. That's the dirty little secret. Now, spiritually, men and women have concerns sometimes as to where is my child. And so I would refer you to Mark chapter 10, verses 13 and 14, or beyond, 13 through 16, I think, actually. This is from the New American Bible Revised. And people were bringing children to him that he might touch them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he became indignant and said to them, "Let the children come to me. Do not prevent them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." So I would say, and I have said to women when they're wondering and worrying about this very issue, if this is Jesus when he was a man on earth, he walked as a man on earth, and of course we know he's God and man, but here he is on earth as a man, and he's not letting anyone get between him and the children. So now that he is at the right hand of his Father, who is there who could keep the children away from him, or keep him away from the children? And I think that this direct answer from Scripture is likely, in my opinion, to be the very best answer you can give. And I would urge you to keep this in mind when women, you don't have to just, first thing with this, but if people are having those issues and wanting to talk about the baby and where is my baby, I think this is a really good answer to give. Now, Pope Benedict authorized in 2007, he authorized publication of a 41-page document, The Hope of Salvation for Infants Who Die Without Being Baptized. And I think that this is potentially worthwhile background for some people in ministry, but this is not something that you would share with people who are struggling and having distress after an abortion. I think it's theologically can be some of it complex, and but it's interesting that prior to his election as Pope, previous to that, he had written, Pope Benedict had written the concept, he said that the concept of limbo should be abandoned because it was only a theological hypothesis and was actually never a doctrine of faith, even though it's been taught from the Middle Ages to the 20th century. It's been taught, people know this. Even young Catholics who shouldn't have been told this, they know about limbo. Or people mistakenly think that, well, maybe their baby's in hell or maybe their baby's in purgatory. So people think a lot of things. We don't need to get into that, but to be aware that people have misconceptions. And that's why the words of Jesus in the Scripture are really the most accessible thing that you can give them, I think. But the term limbo no longer has a place in Catholic teaching. And limbo is not in the Catholic Catechism. So it just doesn't exist. I think the old thinking was, if a child had not been baptized, how could they go to heaven? But yet, in God's justice and mercy, how could an innocent child go to hell? And they don't belong in purgatory either. So limbo was thought of as kind of maybe an annex to heaven, where they could be in a happy place without being in heaven because they couldn't go to heaven. And now the church stops short and will not say, yes, they are in heaven. They say, well, Scripture doesn't say that. But at the same time, when you look at all the basis in this document, it's actually a very hopeful document. And when I read it, I think, how could you say they were anything else except in heaven? But nonetheless, the church doesn't go that far to say, yes, they are in heaven. So we're stopped short there, but we can give the actual words of Scripture from Mark. And so I think that is important because it comes up all the time. I did a Rachel's Vineyard retreat, And afterwards, a woman wrote to the bishop, and I don't know where she got this, but she was mentally ill. And she wrote to our bishop to say, well, I've had this retreat, but I'm still in torment because I'm afraid my baby might be in purgatory. And so again, this is a real thing for some people. Now I give the link, if you'll have access to the slides later. And again, I'm just saying, don't give this to people, but if you want to read it, there it is. And this matches up what the limbo committee came up with is the same as what's in the catechism, and the words are harmonized with Evangelium Vitae. This is from the catechism where they say, we entrust the children to the mercy of God. And they connect us with that verse, let the little children come to me, do not hinder them, which gives us hope that there's a way of salvation for children who died without baptism. Women and men will wonder also, does my child hate me? And you can give them, I've given the link to this, you can give them this a photo of this sculpture, which is designed to show the child in heaven, perhaps forgiving the mother. And there are prayer cards, Catholic prayer cards, with a prayer for healing on the back. You can give these to people, or at least show them if you're not permitted to give something at the prison. Suicide, you can see the scientific study. If you had no pregnancy and just the baseline rate of suicide is arbitrarily set at 1. If a woman gives birth, it's lower than 1. Miscarriage is intermediate. Abortion is much higher, as you can see, the number of deaths by suicide. So it's a real thing. It happens. It's actually 650% higher risk of death from suicide after abortion compared to childbirth. And that increased risk of suicide after abortion persists for at least 8 years. And it's been shown in a 13-year longitudinal study of 8,005 women that in this case, it's not actual deaths looked at as it was in the other studies, but just looking at the suicidal ideation, thoughts and behaviors related to suicide, that live birth was protective, less risk of suicide, miscarriage somewhat increased, abortion more increased. So I'm going to very quickly fly through a bunch of stuff. Re-experience, the PTSD diagnostic criteria, there's 4 areas of symptoms that people can experience. If they have PTSD, a lot of people who had abortions will have some symptoms, even if they don't meet full criteria, and the symptoms can be very distressing and hugely affecting, even if it's not meeting the full diagnostic criteria. One of them is re-experiencing the trauma, which these are called intrusion symptoms. These can be distressing dreams, distressing memories, experiencing intense distress when encountering anything that reminds the person of the trauma. So it is hard for them to talk about it, but if they're ready and they want to talk about it, then, they need to do that, and they're helped by doing it, but you have to understand it's a very difficult thing for them. And just for example, Vincent Rue in 2004 found that 30% of post-abortive American women reported nightmares after abortion. So that's one of the ways that the intrusion can come, flashbacks or other, flashbacks or nightmares. This book, Forbidden Grief, also gives many examples of people who have nightmares or other trauma symptoms. That's a useful book to read by Teresa Burke, who's the author also of the Rachel's Vineyard program. Avoidance, if you remember that picture, avoidance. Oh, okay. So you have intrusion where the event comes back on you, but avoidance is you don't want to be around it and you try to not hear it, not think about it, and yet you can't stop because it comes back on you as your number 1. Okay, so the next type of symptoms is hyperarousal, which I said was too much bad energy. It can be irritable behavior, angry outbursts, reckless or self-destructive behavior, concentration problems, road rage, sleep disturbance, fighting, domestic violence, child abuse, any of those things. Sleep disturbance. There was a huge study of 57,000 women that showed that women were more likely to need treatment for a sleep disorder after having an abortion compared to giving birth. And you would think, well, they might have problems getting their sleep back to normal after giving birth, but in fact, the abortion was worse. And it showed it took up to the 4th year to get back to baseline with that. So again, with self-destructive behavior as part of that hyperarousal. Francine said, I cracked my car 3 times, cracked it up, driving recklessly at extreme speeds. In one wreck, I broke 4 ribs, punctured my lung. My life became a series of calamities, accidents, and self-destructive benders. And obviously, if that accident had been vehicular homicide, she might be in prison for 12 years or something. So Then the last thing is negative alterations in thoughts and moods. And this can include a negative emotional state where you're unable to experience joy and you feel detached or estranged from others. And so think about how that plays out within families, with marriages, and with children. So there was a Norwegian study that showed many trauma symptoms, but also shame. Here, this compared miscarriage to abortion. Abortion is the top line. There's more guilt and more shame with the abortion compared to miscarriage. So it's not just that you had a pregnancy loss, but it was the abortion that caused the guilt and shame. And it was statistically highly significant at 2 years and 5 years, both. It was significant. In Belarus, where they had been influenced by the Soviets and atheism was enforced for 70 years, 80% reported guilt after abortion, even though most were not churchgoers. 80% had guilt. Comparing Russia to the United States, in Russia, 49%, again, where they'd had atheism enforced for so many decades, 49% reported guilt, where in the US, 78% reported guilt. But certainly that's a universal thing that comes up. Women in many countries and cultures have guilt and shame after abortion. So again, this just shows in marriages how that estrangement and detachment takes place, and with children. So why do women do this? Well, partly they may not know, because people get on TV and say, oh, I'm so glad I had my abortion. It was the best thing. But more often, here's an example, like most women, Mary didn't want an abortion, but her husband can be very persuasive. And certainly there's a ton of research about domestic violence being associated with abortion. And we'll pass by on some of this. I was a co-author on an article that's just a resource for you. But short of violence, it could be coercion with threats of homelessness, something like that. So brief interventions you can do, and we're going to run out of time, but you can look at the slides later. A woman on a message board that I'm on wrote, it's a private confidential message board, and I'm not there as a psychiatrist, but just as someone to help. She wrote that she was thinking she would be better off dead. She wished she could die. And I'm not sure if she was actually truly suicidal, but I wanted to write a response to her. And again, I think she was probably in another country. From her name and the background, I think she was probably from another continent. But anyway, what I said to her, because I could see she was Christian and that was an issue, I said, God is the one who gives life, and he created you in his image and likeness. He wants to dry your tears and give you new life. Just pour out your heart to him. In fact, I'll pray right now. That, it was 4 a.m, and I thought, well, I'm going to pray right now in writing. So I said, Lord, and this was just top of my head, but I wanted to pray. Lord, we ask you to pour out your healing love into her heart. Touch her heart gently and begin to heal her. Let rivers of living water wash over her and through her to cleanse and restore. I said, touch her gently, Lord, heal and restore. Give her a glimpse of the new life you want for her. Let her know your love in her life. And we thank you for the restoration that you will give. So she wrote back today, this morning, she said, thank you for that prayer. And she thought that was helpful. And we had further dialogue. But you can pray at the conclusion of a group exercise when you haven't touched on every issue. You can still pray for people, and you can do that one-on-one. One of the things I'm going to suggest, now I guess I'm going to take like 1 minute and we'll have to wrap up. If women have issues about the baby, you can say, well, and I had a woman on the phone where we spent 10 minutes because she was suicidal. She was calling about a Rachel's Vineyard retreat, but she was also having suicidal thoughts. And it was about the baby. So I said, well, your baby is being cared for by Jesus. And if you want, we can pray about that right now. You can name your baby. You can, in your mind, you can hold your baby and say what's in your heart. And so I encourage you, we don't have time enough to really go into those short ones, but I'm going to tell you the 4 key things: relationship with God, with child, with others, and with self. And I discussed this in a video where I was interviewed for EWTN. And I would say, just look, I've given you other resources and some other tips. So I'll leave it at that. I think we better ask the questions. Karen, what questions do we have?
Thank you, Dr. Martha. Yes, thank you, Dr. Martha. I appreciate, and we do have and we appreciate you providing us with an extensive list that people can really dive into. So thank you for that. I'm going to bring up, just since you ended on that note about suicide, Jared brought up that it seems convenient to point to the suicide statistics for this topic when the issues around suicide are much more complicated. Can you provide a larger context for women affected by suicide and abortion? For example, pre-existing mental health issues, domestic abuse, poverty.
What I would say in the prison system, if you encounter women who are talking about suicide, particularly because I know some are lay ministers, there's different, some are priests, some are lay ministers. The prison system should have a way to refer people if there is a risk so that they can have medical attention, a medical evaluation. But I know sometimes that's very difficult to access, but I would say that may be something. In general, I don't know the policies of all your prisons, and if they're just going to put them in isolation and not do anything, but yet if they're seriously suicidal, it may keep them alive. So I think whatever criteria you would have for other situations where you may encounter in ministry someone who's suicidal, if there's a way to make a referral for medical attention, that would be a good thing. However, in some cases, they're not really serious suicidal. I think a lay person isn't always able to make that distinction. And, but I find often, for me, the way I assess people is I ask, is that something that you would really do? Are you thinking that you really might try that? And certainly if they're saying yes, then they need a higher level of supervision and help. And if they say, no, I am not going to hurt myself, sometimes after prayer, it completely changes the situation. The woman I talked with on the phone, that was the end of it. She didn't want to hurt herself when she knew she could be forgiven. And many women also make the mistake of, they mistakenly believe they are permanently excommunicated and there's no road back, and that there's the unforgivable sin. And so they despair like Judas. They think it's unforgivable. And in fact, it is amazingly healing just to know that they can be forgiven, that they're not permanently excommunicated, and to know that their baby, if you show them that statue, maybe they never get to, if they're dealing with baby issues, show them the image of their child forgiving them, or show them, the scripture, and they may not feel suicidal, but certainly if there's depression or suicidal thoughts, ideally, they ought to be able to be evaluated by a medical person. So hopefully, prison ministers going into prisons have general guidelines on that anyway. But I mean, it would be the same if they're suicidal. The person should have medical evaluation, and then you're not responsible for what happens with that.
Thank you for that answer. It's always better safe than sorry.
Yes.
Later. Dr. Martha, would you please address, I know when you're doing one-on-one in conversation, could you address the issues and the comments that are harmful or could cause secondary trauma as a response from a minister to somebody that has revealed that they have had an abortion or are dealing with this issue? Just could you walk through some of the best pastoral lines and sort of what to do, what to say, and what not to say?
I think the most important thing is not to say nothing. I think sometimes people are afraid because you don't know, like, oh my goodness, if I say the wrong thing, am I going to, make them kill themselves or something? And I think that basically, for instance, if a lay person is thinking, oh, well, the priest will handle this, that you need to wait and let the priest talk to you, it's better to at least say, I'm really sorry that you had this experience, or to say something that shows empathy. It depends on what they say, but I mean, basically to make it clear that you're not judging them, and it's a sin like any other sin. If they're talking sin, it's no different. We've all fallen short. All have fallen short of the grace of God or the glory of God. And that we're not standing in judgment, that God heals and forgives. There is no sin that's too big for his mercy. And I actually had, so there's a resource, and some of the things I've given you that will be posted at the website, I believe. This resource from the USCCB talks about how God longs for us to return to him and to allow his mercy. He's prepared a place in his merciful heart for each of us. No sin is bigger than his power to forgive. So it depends. I mean, you don't need to talk about baby if she's not talking about baby, or you don't need to talk about sin if she's not talking about sin, but start where she is and respond with empathy and making clear that you do not judge, so that nobody thinks there's any judgment. And I hate for her to think, if we all think that, oh, this is such a bad problem, it's so horrible, only an expert can deal with it, and you've got to wait 6 months until somebody else comes. You don't want to do that. You want to be able to just offer and to say, you know, if they express a belief in God, but they're afraid that God is mad at them, you can share with them that, no, God's mercy encompasses, you know, we all sin and God wants to forgive. He created us. He made us in his image. He wants to have us in relationship with him. He just loves us like crazy. And to be able to pray and say, well, would you like me to pray with you right now? And then to pray and ask God to show her his mercy. So I think that kind of thing, there's no absolute right or wrong, as long as she knows you're not judging and you can lead her to the God who loves her, who's caring for her child as well, if that's an issue. The issues she brings up, we need to go with. And we don't have to go further than that, you know?
Dr. Shuping, there was a question about, you know, that when there's not a lot of women's prisons around, but there are a lot of men's prisons, how do you go about identifying if there is a need for this ministry? I know you made reference to that when you were talking about it, but I didn't know if you had, I think she's asking more if you had any resources or surveys, or, you know, you made reference to people marking it. Is there a resource?
I think the deacon who did that was just kind of just on the spur of the moment and very simple. There's not a structured survey. Basically, he just wanted to know, like when he had people at Mass, he wanted, or not Mass, but for maybe a communion service or something. He wanted them to know. He had a piece of paper and he says, you know, maybe make an X if you want help with an abortion issue. If there was an abortion in your life and you want help with this, then mark with an X, and if not, mark with a 0 or something, you know, just that simply. And I think you would find probably if the groups were offered, there would be takers on that. And I think one of the things I took it out of the slides, but I should have put it back in there. There's a book by David Reardon called The Jericho Plan, and he calls it stealth healing. He gives 3 sample homilies that you can give if you're doing prayer services at a prison. You can give a homily where he just, you know, maybe he's preaching on the prodigal son, and then he brings in that, oh, well, you know, there's lots of sins and lots of things that keep us away from God, you know, like this or that or abortion, and just mention it. And that may open a door. If you're talking about anger, one of the things with men in particular, even more than the women, is rage got them. There may have been rage because she had the abortion and he didn't want it. And it affected him so greatly that he's just got all this pent up anger. And so if we had time to go further, I've got teaching on how to help people with the anger. And you could actually, I do a whole hour presentation on anger and forgiveness and how to facilitate forgiveness and letting go of anger. And so we can't do all of that today, but I think anger for men. So I think you may start slipping it into other things that you do. If you have a group prayer service, to pray for men and women who've had abortions or for healing or this and that, you know, if there are things, you know, people are struggling with, just include that and see if you have people who come and say, oh, I want help with that, you know, that you can just open the door to it by mentioning it in just in a neutral way in the context with other things, other traumas.
Can you add that homily, or is that the quote? We'll add that into your slides.
I'll send it later. I'll send the book later. Yeah, it's a good book. It's a good book.
We will make sure that that's in your information.
It's called The Jericho Plan by David Reardon. The Jericho Plan.
Perfectly. I'm sure it'll pop up in the chat in a second.
Yes.
Do you have, I was curious, I think there was curiosity if there's fewer abortions due to the morning after pill. Or is the numbers coming down, or is that?
There's some evidence, some scientific evidence that the morning after pill actually doesn't work. And so it gives the illusion that you have safety, you can have sex all you want because the pill is going to take care of things. In reality, I don't think it works as well as it's claimed. The American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs looks at research that there's a lot of research that's being misinterpreted basically, and that the benefits are overstated. If you're increasing promiscuity, there was one study where even when women had the pill at the bedside so they could take it, they didn't have to even go to a pharmacy, they just could have it, and yet there were more abortions in that group or more pregnancies. I haven't looked at that data in a long time, but I don't think that that really has been a big factor. And I'm not persuaded that it actually works the way they say.
There was also a request if we could get the citation for the study of the 57,000 women who revealed that they are more likely to have sleep disturbances.
I can give that to you to post. Maybe we can post that study. It's by David Reardon. I didn't include the citation in this. Kind of ran out of time on a few things, but yeah.
No, that is.
But it was a study by Reardon and Coleman, and so you might be able to just search online and find it. David Reardon with Priscilla Coleman had done that together, but I think I can get a copy of the study and it can be posted.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. And then I'm assuming that Rachel's Vineyard and all is almost done in a retreat type setting, because there was a question about, do you ever do healing retreats in a prison setting? And I know there are other forms.
No, I've heard of Rachel's Vineyard being done as a weekend retreat at one prison somewhere, but more often in a prison setting, they would do it as the once a week format, and to do like maybe one meditation a week kind of thing. And what we would do is, if you had training and had a team, we could probably connect you with some of the other teams and do a webinar on what things they have done. But I know, for instance, one of the things we do is we take a rock and hold it to represent, when we do the woman caught in adultery and we have a rock, we're going to hand the rock around and reenact Jesus's words where he says, you know, is there anyone here to condemn you? And you say, no one. He says, neither do I condemn you. And you're handing it around to each person. But you can carry the rock to represent the people you're angry with, or people you know, where you're stuck. And you carry it until you're ready to lay it down in the group and say what it means. Well, you can't have rocks in prison because that would be a weapon. You can't have candles. We started out at the beginning with candlelight. I put on my first slide, you can't light the candles in prison because somebody might burn the prison down. So there's a lot of the props and things that you have to find a workaround because you can't bring in the props that you would normally use. That normally, I would say the Rachel's Vineyard weekend is like 3 weddings and a funeral all together, the flowers and the props and the things, the music, and it's complex, but it's beautiful, but you can still adapt it and it's still very meaningful to people. So we would work with that. We could help with that. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this wealth of information. Is way more than you could impart on us in 1 hour. But you've done a beautiful job of doing that, and we really, really appreciate that. We're going to close just shortly, and we want to bless you as a whole, Dr. Shuping, for imparting your wisdom on us and allowing us to share a piece of you, but also for your ministry and for your passion for this, and for taking the time to do the research and to participate in all of these programs, and bringing your credentials in merging medicine with your spirituality. So thank you. May God continue to bless you. And I'm going to turn this over before we quickly, because we're right on the margins of time, to Kara, who's going to give a quick commercial on what's coming next.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. We have some great events scheduled for December coming up to close out our slate of events for 2022. So first, on December 1st, we'll host a town hall event called Stronger Together, Supporting Children with Incarcerated Parents. And our presenter will be Danielle Brooke of Project Avery, which is an organization that helps children heal from the impacts of having a parent in prison. They'll share about how they surround youth with a long-term supportive community of peer and adult mentors, and how they empower those youth with leadership development skills so they can break free from generational cycles of trauma and incarceration. At our December webinar, which will be on December 7th, it'll be called A Creative Way to Address Grief. And we will have Sister Annie Killian, who will discuss her approach to ministry as a way of peacemaking. She offers returning citizens and people who are incarcerated a ministry of accompaniment and art, and she offers the space for them to address grief through this program. And at our town hall on December 15th, called Why Ministry, our last town hall of this year, we will have a little bit of a different format. Sister Misty Garriga and Sister Susan Van Valen will be asking those who can attend to share and reflect on their ministry this year. They'll lead a discussion to help us look back over this year of ministry in gratitude and to look forward in anticipation to next year. All of these events can be found on our website for registration, and we hope that you'll be able to attend one or all of them. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you again, and thank you all for attending, and we'll see you in December.